Hi, welcome to STEM Builders JM. Today, I'll be looking at the HSB exam. I'll be analyzing some of the difficult topics, going through the theory, as well as some past paper questions from 2015 to 2019. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, remember to like and subscribe to this channel. You don't want to miss a beat, right? You don't want to miss any of the information being given. STEM Builders is here for you, getting you ready for your examination. I'm a tutor with over 10 years of experience, and just visit my website or send me an email, stemedh@gmail.com, if you would like to schedule a session, 1 hour or two, or if you just want to ask questions that you're having difficulty with. So let's begin the presentation. All right, so human and social biology exam prep prepared by yours truly, Ms. Cavell Hilton, Chief STEM Ambassador for STEM Builders JM and tutor and science educator. So as I mentioned before, I'll be reviewing some of the problematic areas, and I will also be looking at some past paper questions. So I want you to remember, smart people learn from everything and everyone, while average people from their experiences, and stupid people already have all the answers. And that was said by Socrates. So I'm going to be looking at the process of blood clotting, interpretation of data on circulatory system, structures of the heart and their functions, identification of some major bones of the skeletal system, and relating the structure of the skeleton to its functions, as well as function of the skeletal muscles in the movement of limb. So those are some topics that students find challenging, along with identification of the parts of the sensory neuron, process of mitosis, including monohybrid inheritance, genetic variation, causative agents of infectious diseases, methods of control of the spread of infectious diseases. So big concept number one, the process of blood clotting. So you're seeing millions of red blood cells in a drop of blood, right? But in the process of blood clotting, platelets are the parts of the blood that we are most concerned with. So here, blood is divided into plasma, which is 55%, and blood cells, which is 45%. Plasma can be further divided into water and dissolved substance, 90% water and 10% dissolved substances. Blood cells can be divided into erythrocytes, which is a scientific name for red blood cells, leukocytes, a scientific name for white blood cells, thrombocytes, which are platelets. Leukocytes or white blood cells can be further divided into phagocytes and lymphocytes. So this concept map here or diagram pretty much illustrates the areas of the blood that you should know. So the process of blood clotting explained. So in a drop of blood, you're seeing millions of red blood cells, and you're seeing tiny cell fragments, which are called platelets. You see how much smaller they are, and they're not as plenty as the red blood cells, but they're there, and they're there for a purpose. So thrombocytes or platelets are tiny non-nucleated cell fragments formed in the bone marrow, and approximately 250,000 in every drop of blood. They are involved in blood clotting, which is a vital process which prevents excessive blood loss from damaged blood vessels and prevents the entry of pathogens, germs, through damaged skin. Stage one, and in the blood clotting process, the first stage is you get a cut. So there's an injury, and as a result of that, you have a broken blood vessel. Now, how I always remember the blood vessel is like your house is like you're an organism, right? And you have all these different parts. You have a pipe in your house, but the water is in the pipe. So for me, that's like blood. So blood is like the water is in your pipe, and the pipe is the blood, would be the blood vessels, right? No, you don't have your house flooded unless a pipe bursts. So when a pipe bursts, then you know you have all these kind of issues. So if there's a broken blood vessel, it has to be fixed. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of blood, and that could lead to your death. So an injured or broken blood vessel results in calcium ions and vitamin K. So when you look at the diet, these are the areas of it, of the nutrients that you would need to assist with blood clotting. Calcium ions, a mineral, and vitamin K. Stimulating the platelets in the blood plasma to release substances which are called clotting factors that activate the enzyme thrombokinase. Now, I'm sure you remember from your studies of digestion that enzymes end in ACE, right? Most enzymes end in ACE, not all, but most. So thrombokinase is an enzyme, and the clotting factors activate this enzyme once there is a broken blood vessel, a cut, or injury. So this is the first stage. Stage 2, thrombokinase enzyme converts prothrombin, an active enzyme, into thrombin, the active enzyme. So thrombokinase, which is the enzyme, converts prothrombin, and pro usually means before. So it's before it becomes thrombin, and prothrombin is inactive, and then the active form is thrombin. So that's what happens at stage 2. Stage 3, the thrombin then converts fibrinogen into fibrin. And stage 4, fibrin is what now forms a mesh to trap the blood cells and stop blood loss and entry of pathogens. So the two reasons, our main purpose for blood clotting is to stop blood loss and prevent the entry of pathogens. And it's formed in those 4 stages. First stage, you have thrombokinase, right, being activated by the clotting factors in the blood. Then you have prothrombin being converted into thrombin. Then you have fibrinogen being converted into fibrin. And then you have fibrin forming the mesh, which acts as nature's band-aid. So key terms to remember: prothrombin is inactive, is the inactive enzyme. Thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. Fibrinogen changes into fibrin when blood clots. Fibrin is a fibrous protein, and it forms a mesh that prevents blood loss. All right, so let's look at the first MCQ question. In the blood clotting mechanism, fibrinogen will change to fibrin in the presence of, we just did this. The answer is thrombin. So fibrinogen will change to fibrin in the presence of thrombin. So thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin. Coronary thrombosis occurs when a coronary artery becomes blocked with a blood clot. Now remember, coronary arteries taking blood, right, to the heart, supplying oxygenated blood to the muscles of the heart. If this becomes blocked with a blood clot, then that could lead to death of the heart muscles, which would be a heart attack. So coronary thrombosis occurs when a coronary artery becomes blocked with a blood clot. Item 25 refers to the following diagram for type of cell. Now, students always confuse the shape and the look of the white blood cell, the different white blood cells. So this is a white blood cell. So the diagram most likely represents a phagocyte. So don't confuse phagocyte with lymphocyte. Remember that for phagocyte, the shape is irregular, right? Because it needs to move about so that it can engulf bacteria. So it definitely have the shape for that. And it also have a lobe nucleus, as opposed to the lymphocyte, which is more rounded and with a large round nucleus. The cells that engulf bacteria in the human body are called phagocytes. Which of the following components of blood transports urea? So transportation of urea and other things would be the plasma. How blood moves through the heart. So blood is taken to the heart via the vena cava. You have the inferior and superior vena cava, or anterior vena cava. It's taking blood into the right side of the heart. And remember, the heart is divided into 4 chambers. So you have the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. So blood is taken in via the vena cava into the right atrium. It passes through the tricuspid valve, which prevents the backflow of blood, then into the right ventricle, right? Then passes through the pulmonic valve, then to the pulmonary artery, which is the only artery that takes deoxygenated blood. This artery takes the blood then from the heart to the lungs where it becomes oxygenated. Once it is oxygenated, it returns to the heart, right, via the pulmonary vein. So it's taken back to the heart via the pulmonary vein, then it goes into the left atrium through the mitral or bicuspid valve, then into the left ventricle, then through the aortic valve to the aorta. And the aorta is the largest artery, largest blood vessel, and that branches off to take the blood to the rest of the body. So remember, vena cava, right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve, to the pulmonary arteries, then to the lungs, then to the pulmonary vein, then to the left atrium, to the bicuspid valve, then to the left ventricle, through the aortic valve, then to the aorta, to the rest of the body. So you find that blood circulates through the heart twice. So it goes from the body to the heart to the lungs, then from the lungs back to the heart and to the body again. So blood circulates through the heart twice on its journey around the body once. So that is called double circulation. When the heart is in systole, the chambers of the heart relax, nope. So the answer is contract. So diastole, relax, systole, contract. Item 21 refers to the following incomplete table which shows blood vessels supplying some organs. Vessel supplying organ 1. So vessel supplying, so to the lung, you're looking at the pulmonary artery, hepatic artery, that would be the liver, mesenteric artery, the intestine, renal artery would be the kidneys. So the answer is B. Plaque on the walls of arteries causes the hardening of the arteries. Name the disease that describes a condition of hardening of the arteries and state one symptom of this disease. The hardening of the arteries that is caused by arteriosclerosis, not to be confused with atherosclerosis. So atherosclerosis is when that plaque forms in the artery and blocks it, right? While arteriosclerosis is hardening of the artery walls, and that can be due to smoking. In that component of cigarette smoke would be nicotine. That would also contribute to that. Symptom, chest pain, shortness of breath. As a result of the disease named in B1 above, the internal diameter of the artery is reduced, and this could lead to the development of hypertension. Name 2 factors that may contribute to hypertension. Too much salt or fat in the diet, and smoking, stress, obesity. Now, some students will say, diet. Please do not do that. Ensure that you're very specific in order to get full marks for the question. So what examiners say about that? While recognizing that diet could contribute to hypertension, many students fail to state what aspect of the diet. The arteries leading to Brian's brain are becoming clogged. Briefly describe the effects of these clogged arteries would have on Brian's brain and hence on Brian. An example of a good response is the amount of oxygenated blood flowing to the brain would be reduced. So there's a blockage, a stroke is happening here. This would lead to death of brain cells, a stroke, and possibly death. Identification of major bones of the skeletal system, relating the structure of the skeletal system to its function and functions of the muscles. That's concept number 2. So skeletal system. So you have 4 basic bone shapes. You have a lung, which includes the arms, legs, and fingers, short, wrists and ankles, flat, skull and sternum, and 4, irregular, the spine. So here, the scientific name for number 1 is cranium, right? Common name, skull. Then you have the mandible or jaw, maxilla, facial bones. Number 3, the clavicle or collarbone, the sternum, For number 5 is the humerus. 6, the ribs. 7, the vertebral column. 8, pelvic girdle. And 9 and 10, ulna and radius. And I will tell you in a bit how you distinguish between the two. 11, the carpals. 12, the metacarpals. And 13, the phalanges. 14, the femur. 16, the patella or kneecap. 16, the tibia. And remember, the smaller word is the bigger bone. So 5 letters, tibia, T-I-B-I-A, that's a bigger bone. So 16 is the tibia, and 17 is the fibula. 18, the tarsals. 19, metatarsals, and 20, the phalanges. Classification of the bones on the basis of shape. So you have the long bone, which is the humerus, arm, and the femur. Short bones are the carpals and the wrists. Flat bones, bones of the skull. So remember that bones of the skull are flat and they come together and they're joined. The joint there is called a fixed joint, and it's the sutures, right? So the small, when you're born, there's space between these bones to allow your brain to grow. So as you get older, you know, it will come closer together. So that's why persons will say a baby have a mole, because you can literally put your finger where the two bones meet. And then you have irregular bones that makes up the vertebral column. So there are many of these bones right here that makes up the vertebral column, and you know that they're divided into the cervical, which is in the neck, the thoracic, the lumbar, right? So you have all of those bones that make up the vertebral column, and that's important that they're made up of different or smaller bones, because it allows for more flexibility. Instead of one long bone, you wouldn't have much movement. So humerus, upper arm bone, clavicle, scapula, humerus, radius, and ulna. So what you use to remember which side the radius and ulna is the big finger. So this here is a little finger, and this one is the thumb. So the side that the thumb is on is the side where the radius is found, and where the ulna is where the little finger. So it depends on the way you turn your hand. So when you're labeling this in the exam, ensure that you look for the thumb and then you trace it to find the radius. So radius on top, ulna on the bottom. Femur is the largest bone in the body. And then you have the tibia and the fibula and the patella right here. So this is the femur. Notice it's ball shape right here to fit into the pelvic girdle, which is a ball and socket joint. So item 25, 26, refer to the following diagram of a typical long bone. The function of the part labeled 3 is to stir fat and make blood cells. Supplying the bone with nutrients would be here, the blood vessels, right? Here would be spongy bone, and number 2 would be compact bone. So which labeled part represents compact bone? That would be 2. The longest continuous bone in the human skeleton is the femur. We just discussed that. Figure 1 shows a diagram of a long bone. Again, A, spongy bone, B is compact bone. Identify the parts labeled A and B. Write your answers on figure 1. State one benefit of bones being hollow rather than solid. Hollow bones are lighter for movement. So that is a benefit or an advantage of bones being hollow. And it's the reason birds can fly, because they tend to have more hollow bones, right? So that makes them way lighter. That's how we wouldn't be able to do that. Our bones are much more dense. All right. Item 24 refers to the following diagram of parts of the human skeleton. Which of the following combinations correctly identify the bones labeled X, Y, and Z? So X is the femur. Again, larger bone, smaller word. Y is the tibia. Z or Z is the fibula. So the answer is B. Big concept number 3. Identification of parts of a sensory neuron. Functions of parts of the brain and relating the internal structures of the eye. Classification of neurons. So you have sensory neuron, have specialized receptor ends that sense stimuli and carry impulses from the peripheral body parts to the brain or spinal cord. So 3 types of neurons here: sensory neuron, connector or relay neuron, and the motor neuron. And the connector or relay neuron does just that. It connects the sensory neuron to the motor neurons, and it's found exclusively in the brain or spinal cord. So while the sensory neuron is coming from the different body parts, like your skin, you pinch your skin, the sensory neuron is taking the information to the spinal cord, and the connector or relay neuron relays that information to the motor neuron, and the motor neuron sends the information to your muscle, and therefore you move. Sensory neuron, direction of the impulse in this way. Notice the position of the cell body. Notice the dendrites separated from the axon terminal, the myelin sheath, and the nodes of Ranvier. Connector neuron, notice it does not have that long axon. Instead, it has all these dendrites. It does have dendron and all these dendrites. Cell bodies right there with its nucleus. And direction of impulse all over right now. Direction of message travels for the motor neuron in this direction. So it will connect here. Cell body is at the end to one end. It's not in the middle like in the sensory neuron. And then it takes it along the myelin sheath to the axon terminals. So let's look at this question. The cell above is known as a sensory neuron. The way that a lens brings about the fine focusing of object is called accommodation. So remember that these are eye defects: myopia, hypermyopia, astigmatism, conjunctivitis. Those are all eye defects. The passage of a chemical neurotransmitter at a synapse. Neurotransmitter, synaptic vesicle, voltage gated, calcium 2+ channel, postsynaptic. So remember, for a synapse is basically the gap between where the two meet. This is an axon terminal and a dendrite. So where they meet, they don't actually touch. So there is a gap. So what happens is that the electrical signal is converted into a chemical, and that chemical is called a neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter crosses the gap because electrical signal cannot. So just remember, cannot cross it. So electrical signals cannot cross it, but the neurotransmitters can cross it. So they go across the gap and they bind to those receptors, allowing the gate or channels to open. And therefore, when it enters into the dendrite area here, it will then be converted back into an electrical signal. Item 35 refers to the following diagram, which shows a simple reflex arc. So you have Q here, P, and all of that. So what are the structures labeled P and Q? P would definitely be a sensory neuron right here. Notice where the cell body is located, where it's coming from. It's like a sense organ. Notice this one, it's going to the muscles, so it must be the motor neuron. This one in the middle is the relay or connector neuron, and it's located exclusively in the brain or spinal cord. This area is the gray matter. The brain. So the brain has several parts. Main parts that you need to remember: the cerebrum, which is so large, right? These have different lobes, of course, but for the purpose of your exam, you just need to remember that this is called the cerebrum. You have the cerebellum, which is referred to sometimes as a mini brain, the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, the pituitary gland, and above the pituitary gland, you would have the hypothalamus. Item 32 refers to the following diagram, which shows a section through a human brain. What is the name of W? So remember, all of this, which you just looked at, all of it is the cerebrum. So the answer, okay, which of the following processes are controlled by the parts of the brain labeled W? 1, learning and memory. 2, balance and muscular coordination. 3, hearing and learning, sight and learning. hearing, sorry, sight and hearing. So the answer would be B. Learning and memory, sight and hearing is coordinated and controlled by the cerebrum, while balance and muscular coordination would be controlled by the cerebellum. Refers to the following of a human brain. So you have the cerebrum, the hypothalamus, and below it would be the pituitary gland, which looks like a little boxing glove, the cerebellum below here, and the medulla oblongata. Which part of the brain is responsible for conscious thought? Again, the answer is the cerebrum. Internal structure of the eye. So the eye have 3 layers. That's what you need to remember. So you have the sclera, choroid, and the retina, right? You also have the vitreous and the aqueous humor. Here you have the cornea, pupil, which is basically a hole in the eye, the lens, which helps to bend light rays, the iris, ciliary body, suspensory ligament here holding up the lens. You have the fovea or yellow spot and the optic nerve. So notice where the optic nerve leaves the eye, there is no retina there, and so this is also referred to as the blind spot. Item 32 refers to the following diagram for section through the human eye. Which labeled structures cause light to be refracted? The answer is B, 1 and 3 only. So 1 again, looking at the cornea and the lens. Item figure 5 shows some activities that occur when the human eye focuses on a distant object. Annotate figure 6 to show the activities that occur when the eye is focusing on a near object. So the figure that they give you is a distant object, and I want you to give them the responses for a near object. Now, looking at this, you'll notice that they have annotated this diagram. And annotate means to write small notes or brief notes beside the label, right? So here, it says ciliary muscles relax, suspensory ligaments pull tight, and the lens is flat. Now, the key to this is just to write the opposite. So this is a distant object, and you're to do the opposite, which is a near object. So notice, look how they look, you know, this part of it looks a little bit different, clearly. So the first thing, ciliary muscles contract. So here with the distant object, it relaxes. With a near object, it contracts. Suspensory ligaments slacken. Look how they look. Notice what they look like. And finally, the limbs are thick and more rounded. Big concept number 4, process of mitosis, monohybrid inheritance, genetic variation. So genetic engineering is movement of genes from one organism to another. So it's a transfer of genes from one organism to another. And genes can be transferred from one species to another or between the same species. So for genetic engineering, the DNA from organism A, example human beings, and in the case of insulin, we'll take the gene for insulin from humans. And then you have DNA from organism B, example of bacteria. And within the bacteria is very easy to use, right? Because it contains a circular DNA, which is much easier to cut and to manipulate. They don't physically cut it, by the way. They use the enzymes for that purpose. And all of it takes place in a test tube. So you have the plasmid, right? Combining the two, which is human DNA and DNA from the bacteria, is called recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering. So you get both. So in this example, you have human DNA being placed in the bacterial DNA. And the plasmid here is called a vector. This is then placed back into the bacteria, and when the bacteria produces asexually, you get more of the gene, which can be used to make insulin. A cell is described as being diploid when it has the full chromosome number. So diploid, remember, diploid means it has the full chromosome number. Haploid means it have half. So when you put 2 haploid together, you get diploid. You know, sometimes D in science usually, or di means 2. And ploid, you know what I refer to in terms of chromosomes. So it has a full chromosome number, which is 46. So each haploid cells have 23, and when they come together, they make 46, which is the diploid number. Which of the following is an example of genetic engineering? Production of insulin by E. coli bacteria. We just looked at that in theory. In a multicellular organism, whenever cells need to be replaced, cells divide by mitosis. So when cells need to be replaced, for example, your skin cells, they must be identical. So in mitosis, you produce clones of the parent cell and you still have the diploid number. Meiosis is the opposite. There is variation. You wouldn't want that. So when cells need to be replaced, they must divide by mitosis. Chromosomes are made up of protein and DNA. So chromosomes are made up of protein, which are called histones, and DNA. The term dominant refers to the gene which shows its characteristic in the phenotype. So it's a gene is not referred to as being dominant if it does not show its characteristic in the phenotype. So regardless of a recessive gene being present, the dominant gene will show its characteristic in the physical or visible characteristics, so show its characteristic in the phenotype. And that's what makes it a dominant gene. So for example, a person may be black, but they have a recessive allele, right? So they have like big B and little b, but their appearance or physical characteristics would be black. So black being the dominant gene. Meiosis is responsible for the production of male and female gametes. So that's the sex cells, the sperm and the egg. Meiosis produces that, while mitosis produces body cells or somatic cells. Which of the following occurs when a zygote receives one extra chromosome? So when a zygote receives one extra chromosome, that is referred to as a chromosomal mutation, right? And as a result of that, the person can have, like, the most common one that persons know about would be Down syndrome, which is referred to as trisomy 21 because you get 3 chromosome number 21 instead of the 2. So you usually get one from the egg and one from the sperm. But in the case of Down syndrome, you end up getting 2 from the egg. So you end up with 3. So that's a chromosome mutation. Item 42 refers to the following diagram, which shows a process occurring in humans. The process illustrated above is, now what you do, you look here, DNA replication taking place, bam, bam, bam. In the end, you have 2 diploid cells, and look at the number of them, 2, and the fact that they are diploid. Therefore means that this process is mitosis. If this process were meiosis, then you would have 4 daughter cells and they would all be haploid. Which of the following shows correct examples of genetic and environmental variation? So you have height, tongue rolling, height, eye color, tongue rolling, height, eye color. Now, in case of height and weight, seen as more environmental, even though there's a gene that controls them, but it's environmental because it's the amount of food that you have available. So even if you have the gene to be tall, if you're not fed, if you're malnourished, then you would not grow to that height that you have the potential to grow to. So it's seen as more environmental. So the answer is tongue rolling and height. So tongue rolling, definitely genetic. Sex-linked inheritance occurs when the genes are on the sex chromosome. In most cases, the genes are on the X chromosome and not on the Y chromosome. These are units to determine the genotype of the offspring of a cross between a female carrier of red-green color blindness and a normal male. State the phenotype of each offspring. So let's look at that. So we can just here, this is the female XX and this is the male XY. R here is to tell you what to use. So this person is a normal male and the female is a carrier female. So XR times XR give you XR, XR, X big R times X little r give you XR big R and XR little r, XRY, X little RY. So phenotype would therefore be 1 normal female, there she is, 1 carrier female. And students will lose marks when they don't talk. They talk about 2 normal female. It's 1 normal and 1 carrier female, just like how the question tells you. They know the carrier female, so you put it right there. 1 normal male and 1 colorblind male. Item 45 refers to the following genetic cross, which shows inheritance of blood groups in humans. Alleles A and B are codominant to each other and both are dominant to O. So parental genotype AO, and the gametes are here. Here are the gametes. And fertilization takes place. You have the F1 generation. So here, for K, then you just need to find out what is K, L, M, and N. So here you see the cross. The line is coming down from A, and then it goes to B. So K is AB. The line here is coming down to L. So it's coming from A, and then it's going to O. So that's AO. Here, O, B. So that's BO. We're going to write the dominant gene first. And dominant gene is A and B. Or A, yeah. So those are the dominant alleles. When they're together, they're codominant. And O is the recessive allele. So we write the dominant allele first. So this is BO. Here you have OO. So this is recessive. So the response here, answer here is N. So N is homozygous recessive. Remember, homo means the same. So it can be homozygous dominant. In that case, it would be like big A, or big B, or homozygous recessive. In that case, it's too little. It's two O's. All right, finally, big concept number 5, causative agents of infectious diseases and methods of control. Now, I didn't go so much into detail with the theory on this one, so I'm just going to go straight into the questions. Antiretroviral drugs are used to control the production of HIV. So no, as far as we know, there is no cure for AIDS, right? An antiretroviral. So the clue is in the question. Viral, talking about viruses. So it could have been pneumonia. Prevent secondary infection. So it's control of reproduction of HIV. Which of the following cannot be prevented by healthy lifestyle activities? Answer: sickle cell anemia. So even for influenza, you can wash your hands. That's a lifestyle activity. Personal hygiene. Iron deficiency, anemia. That's also lifestyle, because I guess you can eat healthy and eat the correct nutrients to get your iron. Chronic heart disease could be due to lack of exercise or eating fatty foods or too much salt in the diet. Infected persons display signs and symptoms of diseases. Which of the following signs and symptoms are correctly classified? Now, this one is a tricky one, because then you have to look at what is referred to as a sign and what is a symptom, right? So sign, as you know, you can see it, while symptom, the person feels it, right? So in this case, I have sore throat and headache. Some persons would probably think it's C, which is shivering and sore throat. But I think you can see a sore throat, because if you have a sore throat, the doctor can look at the back of your mouth. They can see that the throat is inflamed, it's red. Hypertension does not occur as a result of B. So obesity, yes. Arteriosclerosis, yes. High cholesterol levels, yes, but not anemia. Which of the following statements about herpes is true? And notice what the question is asking, which is true. Here they ask you what is not. So always ensure that you circle or highlight those keywords, because they're extremely important in answering the question. So there is no complete cure for herpes. To which of the following categories of disease does sickle cell anemia belong? Inherited. Which of the following symptoms causes the most injury to a person suffering from dengue fever? So you have muscle pain, aching joint, abdominal pain, and hemorrhaging of internal organs. So the answer, the most injury, would be hemorrhaging of internal organs. Hemorrhaging of internal organs. So that's hemorrhagic dengue fever when you bleed out. And that's also due to the platelets, because what I found out is that when you have dengue, your platelet count drops significantly. So your ability for blood to clot reduces significantly. And so a person also have to get like a blood transfusion, and sometimes just give them just the platelets to bring it up. A person suffering from type 2 diabetes becomes dehydrated and thirsty because sugar makes the blood more concentrated. So of course that will send a signal to the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus of your brain, and that will bring back which will cause it to become thirsty, which will bring back the blood concentration to the norm. So this is a homeostatic mechanism, which is any deviation from the norm. It triggers a sequence of events that brings it back to the norm. Homeostasis means keeping the internal environment the same. In order to reduce the spread of ringworm, one should avoid sharing personal items and walking barefooted in changing rooms. So this is also the same as athlete's foot. Which of the following is a causative agent for the type of pneumonia which is treated with antibiotics? So if it's being treated with antibiotics, it must be caused by a bacterium. Because if it's a virus, it will be antiviral drugs, and if it's fungus, it will be antifungal. Soon after a man is employed as a food handler in a restaurant, several patrons complain of severe fever and diarrhea. Tests show that he is the source of the problem, is most likely a carrier of typhoid. So there are several clues in the question. It talks about it being food. So he's working in a restaurant, so foodborne, and they give you the symptoms, severe fever and diarrhea. Figure 2 shows the average number of asthma patients in a study during a year-long study and the level of the Sahara dust. I like this question in particular because we noticed more this year the Sahara dust in our region. So definitely want to look at this question. So average number of asthma attacks and level of Sahara dust particles. So this one is for the asthma attack, going up here, leveling off, coming down, up again, down, and then you have level of the Sahara dust. So let's look at so you're to describe the trend seen in figure 2. So a good response is that when the level of the Sahara dust was high, the number of asthma attacks were also high, except in December, when another factor may have triggered an increase in the number of attacks. So we can clearly see that both of them are going up, right? And they both come down, but then there's a spike here in December. So there must be another factor that is causing this. This factor could be something else, could be the weather, could be a number of things. Poor response would be to describe the number of attacks and the levels of the Sahara dust as separate incidents. So some students may just say Sahara dust increase and then decrease, while the asthma attacks increase, and without showing the correlation between the two. You wouldn't get full marks for that. So thank you so much for staying with me on this. I hope you enjoyed this video so far and enjoy this journey. Keys to success: understand the key concepts that we just went through. Read carefully, underline the key words like the not and the true. Make sure you're focusing so you remember what you're to answer and you don't misinterpret the question. Eliminate obvious wrong answers. Those are your detractors. So the ones that stand out, you know that they're wrong, get rid of them. Manage your time, answer every question. And if you have to guess, don't choose C. Guess aggressively and not randomly. What that means is eliminate the wrong answers. So that gives you a 50-50 chance of being correct. Thank you. Remember to subscribe and like my video. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at STEM Builders JM.